We're reviewing Smile today. So I have my 4K copy here from Paramount Scares. This is the exclusive slip. It's sort of got that character in the body bag. It's got the name of it on the side. This is the Paramount Scares copy. I ended up watching it based off of someone else's copy, and irregardless, this is the one I have. So let's sort of talk about the movie. Unfortunately, I wasn't impressed with it. I had a lot of hopes going into it. I don't know where I struggled, but I did struggle with connecting to the characters, the story, and the plot. It just felt a little bit too reliant on the music, I think. So one of the main things I noticed in the first 5 minutes of the movie is there'd be this slow rising thematic music to this sort of intense moment for a phone to ring or someone knocks on a door. So it seemed like it seemed like cheap fake outs, and they were spending time and money to create these scenes. Ended up just being fake outs after all. So I was disappointed by that. Those concepts were implemented throughout the movie, just scattered across the movie. So when each of those moments came, I couldn't help but just be just a tad bit annoyed by it. And so that was just me being a little bit picky with the movie. The plot, I think, was okay. It just felt like a rendition of some other horror movies before. Even though it wasn't exactly the same, I would consider this movie being loosely compared, sort of, to It Follows. And It Follows, even though having sexual relations is how the curse is transmitted from one character to the next. In this movie, it's kind of the similar concept of when someone witnesses a suicide, then it transfers to the next person. And so, even though it's a stretch to say that those concepts are the same, but in It Follows, the character who was going through what she was going through had an actual support system around her, and characters that were likable, characters we got to connect with and sort of root for on screen. In this movie, she didn't have anyone really believing her. We had one character who's a cop. He sort of believes her, but we don't see this genuine compassion for her. We see this as sort of he's seen the footage, and I guess he sort of has to believe it because it makes sense, I guess. So he kind of reluctantly believes her. So we don't get any supportive characters in this movie. It unfortunately falls under the trope of horror movie characters where someone witnesses something, it's some supernatural thing, absolutely no one believes her, and she's completely on her own. And so without having any but one character to root for, it was hard to connect with this movie on a personal or emotional level. There was just really nothing that felt genuine about the characters. So, of course, our main character, she witnesses a suicide. Throughout the movie, realizes it is a curse. She's the latest to receive this curse, and she has to kill someone to break it. And she doesn't want to, and doesn't even really attempt to. We get this one scene where she goes in deciding to kill someone, and her boss sees her do it, and turns out it was a scenario she played in her head. So it was another fake out in this movie, which this movie was filled with fake outs. So the only time that it really got, in my opinion, really interesting was its final act, when she finally decides that the entity, as they keep calling it in this movie, needs fear. It needs to feed off fear from people to be able to put on a new face, if you will, for terrorizing the characters. And so she goes off to this cabin, quite a ways off, which is something the characters did in It Follows. Not to compare it again, but that did happen. So in this movie, she goes off to this cabin, and we actually get this scenario where she thinks she's escaped it all, and she goes back to this cop, her only friend, and turns out it was fake as well. So its final act is yet again another fake out, and as far as the design is concerned, where she comes face to face with this entity, has this giant motherly character, this mother, I guess, and this tall woman, this kind of creepy face. It finally actually looked creepy for essentially the first time in this movie. So even though it all happens at last, it is the final act for it. And so by the time we're wrapping things up, she ultimately gets possessed by this entity. And this cop who's now showed up at the cabin, he witnesses her committing suicide. And so now he's witness to this. And I've seen, I believe it was Cinemark, for Smile 2, we see the same character. He's on the roster for the second film. So I'm interested to see what role he plays. From what I can remember, at least in the trailer, it looks like all new characters. So I am interested to see how they shake up the next movie, see how different it feels, see how different it really is. This movie just felt comparable to It Follows in that sense, and in the final act where the entity opens her mouth real wide and the character's just basically frozen. The same thing does happen in It. So now I haven't seen the original It. I know the newer one. That's how Pennywise was able to sort of capture, for lack of a better term, or make his victim be frozen. The same thing happened in that movie as well. So even though I am stretching at these comparisons, I've just seen enough to where this movie just, for me, didn't feel original. It felt like it took inspirations from others, but didn't use them as inspiration for their own design. It used it as something to copy and throw together into one movie to hopefully be interesting enough for an audience. So not only do we not get any supportive characters, leaving us with no one to root for, but the one character in the movie who is going through all of this, she ultimately becomes a victim of the entity, leaving us with no one to root for whatsoever. So if there are returning characters in the sequel, I don't really care if these characters in the first one returns or not, because there is no one left to care about. And it's just unfortunate because I really was intrigued by the concept. And when I saw the trailer for the first one, it looked really creepy. And I thought this was going to be something that was going to haunt me. But it just ended up being mostly fake out. So ultimately, it was an interesting watch. It had its creepy shots for sure. But a creepy still is not something that's going to make it an overall unsettling film for me. So I wish they would have done more with it. I wish the concept would have been more creative. I wish there would have been more details and more sort of scenarios played out with this concept. I wish there were more different things that happened instead of the same thing happening over and over in the movie. But it was interesting. I am excited to see what they do with the sequel. I can't say this is really one of my favorite horror movies. This is not close to my least favorite. This was not a bad movie. I just found it generally entertaining on sort of a basic level. So there's really, I don't dislike this movie. I just found it a little bit more boring than a lot of the others I've seen. But like I said, I am really intrigued by what they're doing with the second one, and I hope they can introduce some new concepts, storylines, and twists to the story of what this entity is and what it does. So we'll see what happens with it. I plan to watch it pretty soon here, and when I do, I'll share a review, share my thoughts on it with you guys. So thanks for sticking with me for this one. I'll see everyone next time.